Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. When Mike Tyson was heavyweight champ, he would go around proclaiming to anybody who'd listen that he was the so-called baddest man on the planet, which I knew Mike Tyson since he's 15 years old. It was not true, not even close. And besides, I really knew the actual baddest man on the planet, and this is his story. As a youngster, he grew up in Rockville Center, Long Island, where he was an avid athlete and became an outstanding linebacker in Pop Warner football, showing the determination and the fierce dedication to whatever the job was at hand as the first signs of his character, which later on would mark his life and influence favorably thousands of other people. Eventually, in his teens, his high school had no football team. So he joined the Pop Warner football team, a very good one, the Long Island Tomahawks. And the Long Island Tomahawks played in the Pop Warner League, their organization, against an organization that I coached, but not on the same age level. I coached the QBH, Queensboro Hill Jets. And our big rivals were the Tomahawks for first place, always in the league at all age levels. And I happened to be coaching at an older age level, so I never really coached directly against him. Anyway, Stephen McDonald became, and he was awarded the honor of being named the outstanding linebacker on all of Long Island in Pop Warner football. And it's a vast organization, so that was a big honor. He was an outstanding football player. He joined the Navy and became a corpsman or a medic, which was absolutely fitting because he was a very, very courageous guy. He never needed a gun to be courageous, but he was a courageous guy, and corpsmen are, and very empathetic and wanting to help other people. So that was a perfectly suitable occupation for him in the service. He came out of the service, and he joined the New York City Police Department, following in the footsteps of his father and his grandfather. Eventually, in pretty short order, he was assigned to the Central Park precinct, which made his mother very happy because she felt Central Park was a nice, easygoing place for a policeman to work. Nothing very dangerous like some of the very, very bad precincts, of which there were too many scattered all around the city. And she was quite content that he had been assigned there, and she felt secure. His dad had told him, even then as a new policeman, he said, look, you have to protect yourself at all times, Steve. And you got to remember, even a 3-year-old can pull a trigger. Keep that in mind, okay? Well, he did, and he conducted himself well, and he did a good job. But just weeks after his father had mentioned that to him, he was in plain clothes, assigned in Central Park, walking around, and he apprehended a young black kid, a 12-year-old kid, on a stolen bike. They had gotten a report of a stolen bike. The description of the bike was pretty distinctive, and you could pick it out. And he knew this was the kid that stole the bike. He was riding the bike. He was a 12-year-old little kid riding the bike. He stopped the kid, and he detained him. And he was talking to the kid, trying to find out why he stole the bike and whether the kid needed any help or anything. He's just a little kid. And as he was talking to this young boy, the 12-year-old kid pulled a gun out and shot Stephen in the neck, severing his spinal cord in his neck. The ambulance took him to the nearest hospital. Another cop came and intervened and says, get him the hell out of here and get him to Bellevue. And that was a very wise decision because Bellevue is probably the best trauma hospital in the world. They treat everything there all the time. And they got him there, and true to Bellevue's history, they kept him alive. While he was at Bellevue, the whole thing attracted basically a media storm, the whole incident. And that was for a couple of reasons. First was obvious. There were lines of visitors around the block at Bellevue trying to get in his room to see him. And they ranged in from every level of society, from food vendors in Central Park who knew him and liked him so much, through the cardinal, Cardinal Egan, the mayor, Koch, and the governor was out there, along with the rank and file of the police department. Everybody was out there. And the second element that made this such a media story of such great magnitude was the attitude of Stephen and the McDonald family. Stephen said from Bellevue, he was quoted on film saying, "You could pray for me, but pray for the kid who shot me." He said, "Can you imagine what circumstances that kid grew up in to produce in him somebody who would cause this tragedy for my life and his life? Pray for him. He needs it just as much as I do." And alongside Stephen, at his side all the time, was his pregnant and very pretty wife, Patty Ann, like a living guardian angel. So the whole thing engendered a phenomenal response in the press and in the public. At the time, I was co-manager with my friend Mickey Earl and Steve Duggan. We co-managed an Irish rock band, probably the most famous rock band in Ireland behind U2, and they were called Bagatelle. And Mickey called me up and said, I think, how do you feel about a concert, a benefit concert by Bagatelle for Stephen McDonald? And I said, "Mickey, that's a great idea. And let me draw up a little draft of the whole thing." And I thought it was a brilliant idea because it was a win-win situation. It was good for Bagatelle. It was good for Stephen McDonald. So that's pretty inviting. So I drafted up an idea for the concert, and I figured it might be good to have it at the Felt Forum, which was the small theater venue of Madison Square Garden, which seats about 2,500 people and has a professional stage. And I thought Bagatelle would give a concert, and we'd have a night of some Irish culture and some boxing champions that I knew I could bring out, and maybe we'd get the sponsorship of the NYPD's Emerald Society or the Holy Name Society, and we could have a successful benefit and raise some money for Stephen. Well, Mickey took my draft and he gave it. He was tending bar at the time, and he gave it to one of his customers, a guy named Bob Kelly, who was Stephen's brother-in-law. Bob Kelly brought it to Stephen's father, David McDonald, and Dave immediately took the idea up and invited us, Mickey and his partners, myself and Steve included, to 250 Broadway, which was the headquarters of the Police Benevolent Association, the most powerful union probably in the city. They represent 30,000 rank-and-file police officers in New York. And we went there, and Dave was in the company of Phil Caruso, who was the president of the PBA, and a friend of the family's who was a PBA delegate or trustee from Manhattan North, Eddie Mahoney, an ex-Marine and a wild guy, but a most wonderful human being and close friend of the McDonald family, a very enthusiastic guy. Well, they loved the idea and wanted to expand it and thought that maybe we should get a committee together, which we did. We formed a committee of 10 different or so people, myself included. Everybody had a different job. And they brought in one of the committee members was a fellow named Dan Danaher, who was just a recently retired detective. And he was the band manager of the Emerald Society Pipes and Drums, which leads the St. Patty's Day Parade every day. Very famous band in New York. They're wonderful. And Dan had just, in his retirement, signed on as the first head of security for the brand new Javits Center, which hadn't even opened yet. They were just opening. And this was in the mid-'80s, and the Javits Center wanted to make good with the public and get out there and get known. And they offered the entire facility for free at no cost. That was an offer we couldn't refuse, and that was really good. And Dan said he would get the Emerald Society Pipes and Drums to perform, and now the thing was growing in scale. And before you know it, we had the whole thing going, and it took place at the Javits Center with 8 bands. Bagatelle were the headliners. It was fabulous. And the mayor, Cardinal Egan, the co-chairs, the honorary co-chairs of the whole fundraising benefit were Maureen O'Hara, the actress, famous for her role with John Wayne in The Quiet Man, and Fred Wilpon, who was the president of the Mets. We had donations from the New York Giants, the New York Yankees, Aer Lingus. We had raffles, trips around the world, Eastern Airlines, and all sorts of things happened, and catering and everything else. We also had almost 20, I got almost 20 boxing champions to sign and come and appear and sign a big ceremonial gold glove that was given and donated to us by Everlast for the boxing equipment company for Stephen, and to be presented to Stephen as a token of the evening. Now, Stephen himself wasn't there. At that time, he and Patty Ann were in Colorado at rehab. But the whole night, I would use the word magical to describe it. You put 10,000 people, cops, in one room with a lot of beer and a lot of booze, and you can expect there might be problems, You can anticipate there might be a problem here and there. But the whole thing was a blessed event. Nothing could be more beautiful, more moving, and smoother. To top it all off, we raised that evening $275,000. We had 10,000 people in the audience. $275,000 that night, plus another additional 175 as an indirect result of that night, totaling $450,000, which we used to purchase a house in Malvern, in Nassau County, where Patty was from, and retrofit that house to suit Stephen, where he lived for the next 32 years till the day he died. Now, as a full quadriplegic. And in Colorado, they could get him to adapt to certain things, but they couldn't cure the underlying circumstance of his paralysis. He was paralyzed from the neck down to his toes. And it was a tough, tough proposition. And over those 32 years that he survived, he and I developed a close personal friendship. He always used to say, you and Mickey were the guys who lit the match. And the rest of it caught fire. And I used to tease him and say, if I knew you were a tomahawk, I wouldn't have lifted a finger for you. And he said, well, if I knew you were a jet, I wouldn't have taken the money. And we would go back and forth and have a lot of fun. But he lived those 32 years in phenomenal fashion. He was stayed and remained. They had him stay on as an active policeman, and they promoted him to detective. And what he would do is be basically a goodwill representative of the police department everywhere, whether it be in a foreign country, anywhere in the United States, or from precinct to precinct. He would show up when cops would muster out on the day shift early in the morning, or the swing shift in the afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, or the overnight shift at midnight. Stephen would show up at every precinct, at every shift over the years, and talk to the cops that were going out to work, and caution them to be careful and to do their best and try to help people, and always invoking, the best ideals of the NYPD by his own example. He never, ever complained. He was a person of deep faith. He organized an annual trip to Lourdes for people who were handicapped and who had been severely injured, and he led the trip every year. He would go there. He, every year, would join the march in his wheelchair. He would join the march from St. Francis of Assisi Church in the West 30s near Madison Square Garden, down to the World Trade Center, honoring the path that Franciscan friar Father Michael Judge took on the day of 9/11. Father Michael was a fire department chaplain, and he walked from his church down to the Trade Center where he was ministering to firemen when the building collapsed and he died in the fire. And every year there's an honorary march honoring Father Michael Judge, and Stephen would be one of the leaders of that march and participate. He he did so much for so many people, and he never complained. And his father, Dave, would say, you have to understand the one thing about Stephen. He said, he's never had a conscious waking moment when he wasn't aware of his condition. And all he ever did was smile. and he embodied the Christian ideals of humility and charity and forgiveness. And he was just the most outstanding person. And at St. Pat's, they had a funeral for Stephen that I've never seen the likes of before or since. It was as if the King of England had died or the Queen of England had died. The pageantry and he deserved it. And by the way, I left this out, but I wanted to mention this anyway because he was an avid New York Rangers hockey team fan. And every year, he would go to all the home games. And every year, the Rangers instituted an award called the Stephen McDonald Award, which the players themselves voted on, honoring the teammate who that season put in the best effort and the greatest effort. And Stephen would present that trophy. He was so proud of that. And the Rangers were proud of it. They would earnestly compete to win that award. They coveted that award because it was recognition by your peers. At the funeral, Stephen was sent off by no less than I counted them from the steps of St. Patrick's, 136 highway patrolmen on their motorcycles led the funeral cortege. And he was sent off, the mayor, the governor, cardinal, and everybody in between, cops and firemen, and everybody who could possibly show up, showed up and gave him the send-off that he deserved, which was fitting for, I guess, he was an everyday saint. I would call him a saintly person in every true sense of the word. And when I think about Stephen, I think about how truly tough he was. Not like Mike Tyson, tough in the sense of giving out punishment, but tough in the sense of enduring unspeakable hardship and handicap, and smiling and laughing and helping others all the way. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.